Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I don't need to get into much time. I don't have a lecture prepared. Rather, what I would like to do is that I would like to assess whether or not basically we have been explaining many different reasons, at least 10, why the basic supply and demand model, which everybody believes is wrong. And I would like to just review in a discussion with students to see if this material has been understood. So let us see. So suppose let's start by this. Suppose I was to ask you that take a standard brainwashed economics student who believes that supply and demand is fundamental, and supply and demand does seem like a very reasonable, simple, basic, clear idea. So in fact, I often tell people that everything that you have learned in economics is all wrong. And they say, no, how can you say that? At least the basic supply and demand model is true. And maybe there are lots of mistakes, but supply and demand seems like a very simple idea which must be true. So, what is the strongest line of attack that you can take?
Sir, first of all, it's carried out under the assumptions of the perfect computation, which actually do not exist in the real world. So that's why.
Yes, this is a good argument, but it is not a very convincing argument, because what happens is that what is the defense that will be made? Suppose you say that yes, this is done under. First of all, the textbooks do not clarify that there is perfect computation is being used. They derive this without actually mentioning this. So normally students will not be aware that the supply and demand model has been derived under assumptions of perfect competition. So this will already be one additional step. It is true, and this is a good and powerful argument, but you have to make it more. So say that no, there's no perfect competition. This is true for any firm. That. So how do you proceed with that? You say, okay, we construct the supply curve. We ask the firms that if this is the market price, how much will you supply? We ask the consumers, this is the market price, how much will you buy? This gives us the supply curve. Where is the perfect competition? There is no perfect competition apparently being invoked, but it is actually being invoked. But where is it? This is the counter argument that I am making. Now you continue.
Sir, according to Sraffa, supply curve is not independent and demand curve is also, because supply is affecting demand. And
this is a very good argument, but very difficult to make. Yes. Okay, explain Sraffa's argument, but this is second stage argument. It's important argument. Yes, go ahead.
And their outcome, that is price, it also affect in reverse supply and demand. So we cannot conclude that supply and demand are independent and we can plot them in a same plane.
Yes, this is what I would like to see, that make this argument in such a way that everybody can understand it, not only your teacher who has taught it to you. So I think that at this level, what you are saying would not be understood by anybody. So that is okay. The point is correct that supply and demand are not independent. But how do you establish this in a way that is clean, clear, understandable by everybody? But let's that's Sraffa's argument is another one. But first argument: how do we establish that perfect competition is involved in the argument which is used to create the supply curve and the demand curve? This is very important.
So, sir, actually the supply curves do not exist in the monopoly and other types.
That is correct, but how do you prove that?
Sir, actually basic assumptions of perfect competition are not fulfilled. That is the perfect information, zero transaction cost, and other So that's why perfect competition is not valid in real world.
ये तो अब यानी this is again second stage. We are saying that the student who you are arguing with says that even perfect competition is just a approximation.
Sir, but
Suppose these assumptions are not met, still, if there is no full information, there is partial information, so we can still construct the supply curve and demand curve, and so approximately the model will be true.
सर वो हम assumption लेते हैं कि मतलब सप्लाई कर्व के लिए हमारे पास डिमिनिशिंग रिटर्न्स होना ज़रूरी है सर, और हमने ये प्रूव किया था कि सर जो रियल वर्ल्ड में जो फर्म्स होती हैं वो उस लेवल के ऊपर प्रोड्यूस ही नहीं कर रही होती जहाँ पर उनकी एवरेज कॉस्ट जो होती है वो या मार्जिन कॉस्ट इंक्रीजिंग रीजन में हो सर, वो या तो डिक्रीजिंग रीजन में प्रोड्यूस कर रहे होते हैं या तो फिक्स्ड मतलब जो कांस्टेंट लेवल रीजन के ऊपर प्रोड्यूस कर रहे होते हैं। तो सर इस
This is again a correct technical argument, but it is a little bit advanced. Somebody who is very good in economics, he has really understood those curves, he will understand. But your average student, your average graduate with MPhil from Qaid-e-Azam will not understand, or from PIDE for that matter, what you are saying. Although you can say this argument is accessible. It can be made in such a way that. So basically, yes. Can you clarify this argument? How can you explain it? Some students say, no, I don't understand. I mean, we make these curves, the marginal cost, and so, I mean, explain this in a way that everybody can understand. Argument is correct and valid, but you have to explain it better.
Sir, according to conventional economics, supply curve exists due to its marginal cost, above the marginal cost curve. So, empirical evidence shows
Not above the marginal curve. The supply curve is the increasing portion of the marginal cost curve.
But empirical evidence shows that marginal cost is not decreasing at all.
This is good. Empirical evidence shows either that the marginal cost is flat or it is decreasing. Now, how does that? Now go take the next step in this argument. Okay, so use this to show that there is no supply curve.
Not the price setter is not price takers. So
No. Suppose that I am a firm and I have a decreasing marginal cost curve. So now, why is there no supply curve in this situation?
सर मोनोपोली में वो कहते हैं ना कि हमारे पास जो मार्जिनल कॉस्ट कर्व होती है वो सप्लाई का इंक्रीजिंग होती है, लेकिन हमारे पास यहाँ पे
So this is the part of the marginal cost curve that is above the minimum average cost curve, the upward the rising part of the marginal cost curve. It starts from the minimum point of the average cost curve. This is the supply curve. So if the marginal cost curve is decreasing,
Yes.
then how we will get from it the positive supply curve of the firm?
All right. This is the argument is correct that technically, if your marginal cost is curve is declining, then you haven't got to the supply curve. But I want you to convert this technical argument to something which is intuitively understandable to everyone. So suppose we are a firm and I have a marginal cost curve which is decreasing, or you see, you can take it very clearly, like you see the park example where I buy things at some wholesale cost and I sell them at a higher cost. So my marginal cost for the next unit is constant. So now, according to theory, this portion of the curve is not on my supply curve. But can you explain this in non-technical way? That I am a producer and I am producing things and marginal cost is going down. Why? So why is my current level of production not optimal according to standard economic theory? You don't need technical mathematical arguments to prove this. This is very simple, straightforward, easy to understand and see. What should I do in this situation as a profit maximizing firm when my marginal cost is declining? What?
Production increase.
I should increase my production. So now, why didn't I increase my production?
सर हम इसको एनएमपी की जो आर्गुमेंट है उसके साथ लिंक कर सकते हैं कि वो कह रहे थे कि सप्लाई जो है वो इफेक्टिव डिमांड से है.
It's बहुत complicated हो जाएगा. It's true, but this is. I'm trying to make a very simple argument which anybody can understand. The average student doesn't understand these complicated technical arguments. The first point is that if I am at a point where marginal cost is decreasing, then this point cannot be a profit maximization point under the standard assumptions.
सर हम इस पॉइंट में भी कह सकते हैं कि सर मतलब जो प्रोड्यूसर होता है वो तो विलिंग कर रहा होता है सप्लाई की, लेकिन सर उसको रेवेन्यू जो होता है सर वो उसमें डिफरेंस आ रहा होता है. तो सर जब उसकी जो कॉस्ट है वो इंक्रीज नहीं हो रही, तो सर वो जितनी आउटपुट को सप्लाई करना चाहे तो इजीली सप्लाई कर सकता है. तो सर फिर इस में हमारे पास वो पॉइंट तो नहीं आ सकता सर जो प्रॉफिट मैक्सिमाइजेशन कंडीशंस को.
लेकिन सर जब प्रोडक्शन बढ़ाएगा तो ऑटोमेटिकली प्राइस तो डिक्रीज हो जाएगी, प्रोडक्शन लेवल बढ़ जाएगा.
You see, this now we are getting somewhere. That is, technically, when you go to the market and you try to observe how much the firm is producing, then if the firm is maximizing profits under the assumptions that you have studied in the textbooks, it cannot be at a point at which the marginal cost is decreasing, because if any firm is producing at a point which the marginal cost is decreasing, then it should expand its output. Now, so if it expands its output, then the price remains constant according to the standard perfect competition assumptions, which are now coming into play, because now as you expand output, the firm is small, so the expansion does not cause any change in the price. At the same time, the marginal cost is declining, so if you are making a profit on the current unit, you will make even bigger profit on the next unit, or at least the same amount of profit. Either way, this point cannot be the profit maximum. Even if you make the same amount of profit, as long as it's not zero, you are going to be increasing profit by increasing production. So now the question is, all of these firms that we observe, which is 90% of them, are producing at constant conditions of constant marginal cost or decreasing marginal cost. And also, as I am saying, we are trying to explain this to standard brainwashed economics student, so he will not be buying this very easily, and technical arguments don't work very well. So this is very easy to understand. It's very basic. That it's clear that the firm is not maximizing profits. Now the question that arises next is, why doesn't the firm maximize profits? It makes complete sense that firm should try to maximize profits. So if the marginal cost is declining, then it should try to increase output. So why isn't the firm increasing output?
Satisfying behavior.
No, this is not due to satisfying. This is not because. That is correct. There is a constraint. The firm does not see infinite demand. This is the where the perfect competition assumption is coming in. So you see, we can say yes, S&D is derived under perfect competition, but this is not self-explanatory. Where is the assumption? So now the assumption is that if you expand output, there is always a buyer. This very unrealistic assumption of S&D is that if I reduce the price by 1 cent, everybody will leave my product and they will go to some other place. If I increase my price by 1 cent, then if I decrease, then everybody will come to buy from me. And if I increase by 1 cent, everybody will leave and go to other firms. This depends on two assumptions. One is perfect information, so that everybody knows all the costs, and also zero transaction cost. Going from one place to another place doesn't cost anything. When both of these assumptions are not true, then I have some level of flexibility in setting my price. But when I have flexibility in setting my price, it is automatically true that I am not a price taker. So this is one part, but all right, it's still not sufficiently convincing in the sense that I may have a little bit of flexibility, but to some extent the market will determine how much I can charge. So now this second argument, that how come I'm not expanding my output if my marginal cost is decreasing? Well, that is a major problem with the perfect competition, in the sense that the perfect competition is saying that I face a flat demand curve. That is, at this price I have infinite amounts of demand available. But this is not true for any firm, and it's not true in the real world, that I can get I can sell my good at the market price in any amount that I like. In fact, you see, the products are differentiated by both branding. So I have my brand, and it has a declining demand curve. As long as you don't have a flat demand curve, then you can explain why I would need to keep my production small. Yani if I cannot expand my production, because if I expand my production, the demand curve will decline and I will not be able to sell at the same price. This is again perfect competition. So you cannot say in an argument that it depends on perfect competition and therefore it's wrong. You have to explain how it depends on perfect competition and why this assumption is wrong and why it's realistic. I mean, this is how the argument goes, that it is intuitively plausible. Yeah, because the supply and demand model itself is intuitively plausible. It makes a lot of sense. So if you want to counter it, you cannot counter it by a technical mathematical argument which doesn't make sense. You have to counter it by real world grounds which make sense. So you can see that there is no market price, there is no unique market price. If I go onto the market with bananas which are the same, and I sit on the footpath and I have my own stall, I can charge, and the person next to me is charging 100 rupees for dozen bananas. I can charge 90 rupees and I can charge 120 rupees. And in neither case will it be true that I will get no customers if I am charging 120 and everybody will come to me at 90. And we see this happening every day, that the different fruit sellers are selling the same fruit at different prices, and sometimes it's exactly the same. I mean, it's not even that there is quality difference. So this cannot happen technically according to the supply and demand model. It means that everyone, including the small fruit seller who is selling an identical product in conditions which are as close to perfect competition as you can find, he has some margin to set the price. But if he is setting price, then it cannot be the case that there cannot be a supply curve, because the supply curve depends on price taking behavior. So this is one argument, but this is not the only argument. There are other arguments, because this booth of Western knowledge is so strong, you have to punch it in several different places before it can break down. So this is one argument. This argument explains the problem with the perfect competition assumption, and this is directly observable. When you go to the marketplace, you see that neighboring fruit sellers have different prices for the same good. So this is obviously a violation of the perfect competition. The same thing is true in general. People are selling the same car. You have Toyota, the same identical car. If you go to a different dealer, you get different prices, slightly different, but still it's not the same car. In America, they have these refrigerators, washing machines, drying machines. So I learned when I investigated, when I was trying to buy for myself, that all of these machines are produced by one big wholesaler. And then the Sears company takes the machine and puts its own label on it. And now it's the Sears washing machine. But the other, Walmart, takes this and puts the Walmart brand on. So the machine is the same, but with the Walmart brand it will sell for $80, and with the Sears brand it will sell for $90. And so again, there is this strange difference between. So again, we don't have price equals marginal cost. In fact, on this visit to the USA last time, I found one person. He is using this medicine which is called EpiPen. This is life-saving medicine. If you have an allergic reaction, a strong allergy, you need injection of that fast to prevent your if strong. This is a life-saving injection anyway. So one injection costs $600 if you are not insured, and if you have insurance you can buy it for $115. This exact same medicine in Pakistan costs 20 rupees. So price equals marginal cost. So obviously, now these are the this argument is coming from Hill and Myatt. Basically, the firms have market power. They can set prices, and they can set prices for life-saving medicine at $600, 60,000 rupees, for when the cost of production must be 20 rupees or less, because they sell it for 20 rupees in Pakistan. So obviously they are making a profit in Pakistan, so it must be the marginal cost of production must be less than that. So now the Hill and Myatt argument is that firms are large and they control the governments because they have a lot of money, so they pay the senators, and they did. There is this senator, I think his name is Toshin or something like that. I've forgotten the name. But anyway, he received a big bribe and he passed this bill in Congress in 2007, 8, I don't remember when, but it was in early 2000s, where the I think it could have been part of the Obamacare bill, that the government has to buy medicines from the drug companies in the US. The drug companies can name their price. The government is not allowed to negotiate. The government is not allowed to import the medicine from Canada, the same medicine at a lower price. So basically the firms, because they have power, they can set the regulations to favor them. So now the drug companies can name their own prices and they profit maximize. So life-saving drugs are sold at astronomical prices to maximize profits. So this idea that the market equilibrium leads to efficiency is obviously wrong. Anyway, so that's one argument based on the perfect competition. This is relatively easy to understand. There is another argument which comes from the labor market, which is also very easy to understand, and therefore it's more important than the more difficult Sraffa argument. So what is that argument? The other argument which is very easy to understand. How's that?
MPL
No.
equal to
Huh?
MPL is equal to wage.
MPL equals wage is yes, this is also true, but you see the Keynesian argument. What is the Keynes argument for failure of supply and demand in the labor market? Huh?
Asymmetric behavior of
सर
labor.
केन्स
Asymmetric is a difficult argument.
केन्स कहते हैं कि वो negotiate करते हैं
Nominal wages.
Nominal, हाँ, that's true, but that's a difficult argument. Nominal और real में difference कौन समझता है? I mean, I want the Keynes argument is very. That's too difficult to understand. It is true. If you look at the Mia and Sufi book, they provide a good argument. They say that in the year after the global financial crisis, they examined what happened to the wages. So they found that a large number of cases, the wage was exactly the same as it was the previous year. Now this is a evidence for downward price rigidity, because actually, of course, unemployment had increased by a large amount, so one would expect to see a downward shift in the wage. But the wage cannot be cut for many reasons. These reasons are discussed in books, like it will have a bad effect on morale. Employees do not like wage cuts. Efficiency loss. They will start working badly. That okay, you have mistreated me, so I will mistreat you. These are, after all, human beings. It's not units of labor. It's not a commodity being purchased, and so that's why the labor market is different. But these are all more difficult arguments than the basic argument, which is based on the Keynesian idea of involuntary unemployment. What is that? Yes, but what is involuntary unemployment? Well, that we see every day, so what's wrong with that? Every graduate is complaining about this.
So
Yes.
according to classical involuntary unemployment, there is no.
Forget about classical, and we are talking here about supply and demand theory. So what's the problem with this?
So there is so much supply in the market, but there is no demand for that. And then they said that the resources are scarce.
Sir, according to supply and demand model, there should be no involuntary unemployment. But
Yes, please explain this. This is exactly the argument, but you have to explain this argument. Does the average student know about this argument? I mean, they observe it every day, but they do not see how this conflicts with supply and demand theory. If you take the average student who is a PhD in economics from PIDE or Qaid-e-Azam, and you ask him that, look, does there exist involuntary unemployment? He said, yes, of course, I am looking for a job, I can't find it. And you say, do you believe in supply and demand theory? He will say, yes, of course, the supply and demand theory is true. So he sees both of these things, but he does not see that there is any conflict between these two things. So now the job is to explain why these two things are not compatible with each other. Why is there any difficulty with involuntary unemployment and with supply and demand? Why is there a problem?
Sir, there can be information gap between the employer and the employee.
Now you are actually, this argument, the information gap argument, is protecting supply and demand theory from the evidence of involuntary employment. It doesn't explain why there is a conflict between involuntary unemployment and supply and demand.
Sir, basically classical believes that, sir, there is low frictional unemployment, sir. Keynes target the frictional unemployment. Sir, there is a huge gap between information or asymmetric information between employer and worker, sir?
No, basically, this does not answer my question. I am asking a question. I am asking, why does involuntary unemployment conflict with supply and demand theory? Yes.
So because supply and demand theory says that wages set at the automatically supply equal to demand.
So, fine.
Sir, but there is involuntary
But
supply is
employer
more,
unemployed
but there
people
is no jobs for
It is excess supply of
excess
labor.
supply.
Equilibrium doesn't exist because supply is
Equilibrium.
Sir,
According to
on
supply
a
and demand
set-
model, wages should be go down to equilibrate supply and demand, but in real world it doesn't happen. People
Now,
are
this
unemployed.
is getting closer to the point, but
Sir, even
not quite there yet.
the wages, they are showing that this is the wage, but even on that wage, there is no job opportunities. That's why the supply and demand scissor fails. It's set.
Alright, first, in order to understand, you have to explain what is the difference between voluntary unemployment and involuntary unemployment. What is this concept? I mean, you haven't any clarified. There is something called voluntary unemployment and involuntary. I mean, first of all, there is unemployment, but so what is the difference between voluntary unemployment and involuntary unemployment?
Isn't willing to
People deliberately don't want to work,
at the
and
prevailing
involuntary
wage.
unemployment they cannot find work.
No, that's not the difference.
Sir, if one has ability to work and his willingness to work, but he deliberately restrains himself from doing work, it is voluntary. And in the other case, it is involuntary.
Alright, so then I say that, you see, if you are unemployed, it's because it's voluntary. I mean, how, basically, what we are trying to do is to defend supply and demand theory, and so we say that if you are unemployed, it's because you are lazy, you are not looking for a job, you are not interested in finding. So, don't blame the market and don't blame supply and demand theory. If you can't find a job, it's because you are not looking hard enough. That's also friction. So how does Keynes, so now the supply and demand theory is safe. So what's the problem? There's involuntary unemployment because people don't work hard at looking for jobs. So why is there any problem with supply and demand theory?
because एक fixed लेबर फिक्स है एक पॉइंट इन टाइम पे और उसको completely equate करना चाहिए डिमांड जो कि नहीं करती इन theory.
That is not true. You see, you are missing the central idea. There is a supply curve of labor. At any given price market, there is a certain amount of labor which is being supplied. So, if somebody is willing to work but not at the current market wage, that is involuntary. That is voluntary unemployment, in the sense that he is willing to work, he wants to work, but he cannot find a job at the wage at which he wants. Like, you have a PhD in economics and he can find a job as a peon. So, then if he doesn't work, that's voluntary unemployment, because he can find a job, it's just that he doesn't like the wage that is being offered. So, now involuntary unemployment, what is that?
At current wages, he want to work, but he can't.
Yes, at the going equilibrium market wage at which lots of other people are working. So he wants to work even as a peon, but he cannot find a job even as a peon. So now you have involuntary unemployment, because he wants now, according to the theory, you see, if the person wants to work but at a higher wage than the going market wage, that is voluntary unemployment. But there is nothing that will happen to supply and demand because of that. But suppose the person wants to work at the going market wage and then he cannot. Now, according to the supply and demand theory, something will happen. What will happen? There is a mechanism which works to eliminate this excess supply. Yes. So we have, yeah? Yes, the man will come and he will say, I will work for less than the going wage. And now, because the firm is profit maximizer, it will say that, okay, I will fire one of my existing workers and I will make more money by hiring this new laborer at a lower wage. So this is what should happen. But does this happen? So there are two things to this. One is that it is not observed to happen in the sense that, okay, that's why we need to work with the wages. You can't really work at the PhD level because then we get into this human skills and human capital, and it's a more complicated argument. You can make the argument, but it's more difficult. So we go to the minimal level of unskilled labor, which anybody can provide. And we ask, does anybody who wants to work at a job for which there are no qualifications, like putting down bricks in the brick factory, or working as a telephone operator, or working in a job where there are no skills required, and he wants to work at the going market wage, jo dihadi pe kaam lena chahta hai, does everybody find a job at the going market wage? Well, we can go to the places where the people gather to offer their wages for daily work and we can see that not everybody goes and finds an employment. So of course there is a counter to that. There is supposedly something called the natural rate. So we ask if maybe the amount of unemployment is due to friction and due to natural rate, etc. But so anyway, there are counter arguments, and then there are counter arguments. It's not so easy to destroy this supply and demand theory, but you have to understand that different levels of arguments. So now there is a mechanism that should take place. We can now attack the mechanism. That what should be happening. The daily wage rate is, let's say it's 500 rupees per day, and so there are 100 people who are waiting for jobs, and so somebody comes and say, okay, yes, I want a worker. So everybody races and he picks the first one who gets to him and he says, okay, come with me, and he hires him for 500 rupees for the day. Now all of these people are hatta-katta laborers, and they are all ready to work. So according to supply and demand theory, something should happen. What should happen now? Yes, one of these people will say, okay, instead of taking him at 500, take me at 400. It's better for me to work at 400 rather than to get no job. But of course this does not happen. Why doesn't it happen? So first of all, the supply and demand mechanism does not work, and we see this everywhere. I mean, there's a job for assistant professor, and we offer 120,000 rupees, and we can offer jobs, and at least in the private sector, at contract. So there are lots of people with PhDs who have the paper requirements, eligibility for assistant professorship fulfilled, and they want to work at 120,000 a day. And every day I get emails saying that here is my CV, please give me a job at PIDE. So the mechanism says that the equilibrium, the price of the equilibrium price is too high. There is involuntary unemployment. People want to work at the going wage, but they cannot find a job at the going wage. It's not that I want to work as an assistant professor, but I want 150,000 rupees. That is voluntary unemployment. But involuntary unemployment is when you want to work, he says, okay, I'm ready to work as an assistant professor at 100,000 rupees. Now we have a problem with supply and demand. Because the going rate is 120, you want to work at 100,000 rupees. But still you cannot find a job. Now what is the problem? Now the supply and demand theory says that this cannot happen. Now there is a contradiction with supply and demand. if the going wage for Naib Qasid is 15,000 rupees a month, and there is 100 people you can find who says, I want to work as a Naib Qasid and I am ready to work at 10,000 rupees per month. Now you have a serious problem with supply and demand. And that is involuntary unemployment. Yes?
Sir, contracts होते हैं fixed time period.
Yes, this is called friction. But actually a lot of Naib Qasids are working on contracts. So it would be possible for me to fire them on 1 month's notice and hire another one. But you're right, this is one of the explanations that is offered for why. So that is why, you see, what Keynes said is that involuntary unemployment occurred. The unemployment rate before the Great Depression was, in the USA, it was actually 2-3%, very low, and and then it went to about 17%. So one of the arguments that could be made, and then not only did it go to 70%, it stayed at that level until the next World War, which was about 17 years. So not only was the unemployment rate high, but it remained high for a long time. If it occurs only for a short time, then you can explain it as due to being friction. Maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but 17 years is difficult. The other thing is that you can say that this is the natural rate, that due to market frictions, this level of unemployment is normal. Like we could try to use a natural rate explanation, that okay, in every day there's so many jobs and a certain percentage will not find unemployment, again due to friction and transaction costs and information costs, etc. But when the economy has shown that it can hire, unemployment can be at 3% for many years, then to say that it is natural for it to be 17% is no longer possible. So the argument depends on knowing about reality. It doesn't depend on doing mathematics. I mean, this is what happened. That's why there was a crisis in economic theory. It is not just that unemployment is 15%. If it is 15% for a century, then you can say, okay, this is normal state of affairs. This is not, okay, there are 15% of the people who are involuntarily employed. They are looking for a job and they will not find it for another 3 years because this is the amount of time it takes to find a new job. So even if there is an involuntary unemployment, if it lasts only for 3 years and that is the normal rate for the economy, then you can explain it. So this is a counter argument, and then the counter argument is that yes, but the economy had 3% unemployment for several decades before the Great Depression, and then it suddenly jumped to 17%, and then it stayed at that level for 17 years. So now this cannot be a frictional, and this cannot be a natural rate. So the supply and demand theory does not work in the labor market. So now this is this is an argument which everybody will understand. This is not something about Sraffa's interaction between labor and demand, which is also a true argument, but much more difficult to understand and explain. But this is something which everybody experiences. They have direct contact. They are afraid of not being able to find jobs. So, if you say, look, if the supply and demand theory is true, then you should be able to find a job at the going market rate. In fact, on a deeper level, a very important deeper level that you should understand, the supply and demand theory was developed to counter Karl Marx. Karl Marx argued that the capitalists exploit the laborers. They pay them less than what they are deserve, because all of the value that is produced by labor. So any profits that the capitalist is making is on the basis of his exploitation of labor. And so that leads to the theory of the labor managed firm, where there is no capitalist and all of the workers of the firm share the ownership. That's within a capitalist economy. The other option is communism, where the state owns all of the capital so that there is no exploitation technically. So once you accept Marx's argument, but the economic theory is a counter argument by the capitalist to the Marxist, and it says that no, laborers cannot be exploited because there is this supply and demand. The amount of labor that is hired is determined by the market. Neither the capitalist nor the laborer has anything to say about it. And so anybody who wants, so according to this theory, there is a market wage that is determined by forces of supply and demand. Nobody has anything to say about it. The capitalist cannot control it and the laborer cannot control it. And at the market rate, anybody can find work. So according to this theory, the wage is not set by the capitalist and cannot be an exploitation. So now this argument is wrong, and once you see that this argument is wrong, you strengthen the position of labor, and this is exactly what Keynes did. Keynes said that the forces of supply and demand will not eliminate unemployment. So there can be equilibrium. This is the main and central and core contribution of Keynesian economics. Forget about ISLM curve, etc. Those are actually not Keynes' ideas. The ISLM curve, Keynes' own idea is rather radical, rather different from what was called the neoclassical synthesis, which was created by Hicks and Samuelson. What Hicks and Samuelson did was that they reconciled what Keynes had to say with neoclassical theory. And so basically what they say is that what Keynes is talking about is a temporary problem that occurs because of nominal wage rigidities. Actually, Keynes started out by saying that maybe it is due to wage rigidity. Later on, he changed his position. He said that no, even if the wages are flexible, the same problem will occur. And he had an argument which was based on complexity. And so this argument was not understood ever by economists, including Samuelson, who didn't understand what Keynes was saying. So the neoclassical synthesis, forget about all of that. We look at the instead of the technicality of the argument, we look at what is behind the argument. So what is behind the argument is saying that the free market forces of supply and demand will not eliminate unemployment, contrary to what the supply and demand theory says. The supply and demand theory says that all involuntary unemployment will be eliminated. It doesn't say that voluntary unemployment will be eliminated. So the Keynes said that no, voluntary unemployment is not eliminated. People who want to work at the going wage rate, but they cannot find jobs. So then what is the solution? Well, the solution, according to Keynes, was that the problem arises due to inadequacies in aggregate demand, and so the government has to step in and increase the aggregate demand, and so the government should take policies to eliminate unemployment because the market will not do it. So basically, following the Great Depression, there was a huge amount of unrest in Europe and in the USA. The laborers were very much influenced by the Marxist ideas. There was huge numbers of them, and they were massively unemployed, and they were creating a lot of social unrest, and there was a lot of popularity for the Communist Party in both Europe and in the USA. There were labor unions, and they were trying to get jobs, and they were trying to argue that the capitalist system doesn't work very well and we should change the system, and so on. So many people have said that Keynes actually rescued capitalism, and he said that, okay, there is this one special problem of unemployment and the government should step in. So again, now we are going against free market theory, which says that the free market provides the most efficient solutions to all problems, and any time the government interferes, it always causes more problems than it creates. So now we are saying that no, this is not correct. The government must interfere because the free market is providing the wrong output. This is really very damaging to the capitalist structure, and that is why Keynesian theory did not survive, and it was attacked over and over again by capitalists who did not like it one bit. But Keynes saved capitalism in the sense that he provided a capitalist alternative which solved the biggest problems that people had with capitalism, which was that there was massive unemployment, people were starving. And it was clear to everybody that this is not necessary. You see, because just a little while ago, everybody had jobs, there was prosperity. So the economic system is not, factories were running, and then there was a sudden economic crisis, and then factories were not working anymore. So it is not that somehow it is in the state of the nature that some people will not have jobs. No, the nature state is not like that. And so it is possible for everyone to have jobs. So why isn't it working? There is something wrong with the system, and we can change the system to fix this problem. So Keynes offered a solution, and he said that if the government starts to buy goods, and Keynes even said that Keynes had two solutions. One was the monetary solution, the helicopter money. Keynes actually didn't say that, he said that, but Friedman said that if the government prints up money in and just throws them on the streets in helicopters, people will pick up this money, they will start buying goods, that will create demand. The factories will say, we have closed down one factory because there was not enough demand, but now that there is demand, let us open up the factory, we hire the laborers, we start producing the goods because we see that there is demand, and once there is the factory opens up, the laborers have jobs, they have incomes, and they will add to the demand, and so there will be a spiral which will be beneficial for all, and so you will eventually, so once the money is printed, this doesn't have to be done continuously, the demand, aggregate demand will pick up, and ultimately the economy will move towards the full employment as according to the new classical theory. So on a deeper level, the argument for supply and demand is an argument that the free market works the best for eliminating unemployment. And Keynes said that no, that is not true. And this argument of Keynes was never accepted by the neoclassicals. So to this day, if you take a textbook in labor theory, they do not explained that Keynes has rejected this theory, and we have not found an answer to the objections of Keynes. Yani, progress would be that you say, yes, Keynes made these objections, these criticisms of labor theory, supply and demand, and we have found these answers to what Keynes said. But no, the current textbook in labor theory, which is currently being taught in Harvard, does not address the objections that Keynes made. And I think that you have seen my lectures on Borjas was the text that is, Borjas is currently a professor at Harvard, and he has written the textbook which is taught in a lot of places, and this is just one example. All texts in labor theory are similar. So Borjas is honest enough to recognize that there are problems. He says, yes, so he says that why is it that this very sensible model of labor and supply is so strongly rejected by empirical evidence? So he understands that empirical evidence is against it. So he doesn't say that because of this let us change the model. He says there must be something wrong with the data. So the evidence is very strong. It's very direct and clear and intuitive, unlike the Sraffa argument, which is not direct and not easy to understand. But actually Sraffa argument is not that difficult. You have to understand it. That okay, suppose that there are three possible cases. It's very easy actually. It's important to understand how to make these arguments in a simple way, because the average person who studies economics doesn't understand the deep arguments. So to explain to him, to convince him, you have to find simple arguments. So Sraffa argument is very simple. Either the industry is working under increasing returns to scale. If so, then of course the larger the firm, the more cost efficient. So the natural monopoly is the solution. This is something which everybody understands. So returns to scale must either be constant or they must be decreasing. Now, if the returns to scale are decreasing, then we have a problem in that if you have decreasing returns to scale, then the larger firms are inefficient. So you should have more and more smaller firms, and so you should subdivide the firms into half size and quarter size, and this process can be continued until you have zero size firms. So it won't happen like that. At some point you will get to a firm size which will have constant returns to scale. You only need to have constant returns to scale locally. By locally I mean that at that size, if you expand by a little bit, the returns to scale will not change. You will not have diminishing returns. Because if you have diminishing returns, then you should reduce the size. So as long as your constant returns to scale, so now according to logical arguments, we have a lot of different small firms, and there is constant returns to scale in the sense that if you add more firms at that size, the returns to scale should remain the same. Okay, so now if you have constant returns to scale, so diminishing returns to scale is not possible either, as I explained, because you should chop down the firms in size until you get to constant returns to scale. So both increasing returns and decreasing returns are not compatible with efficiency. So now what about constant returns to scale? Now we have a problem that in this case the assumption of perfect competition is not possible, because at this level you should keep increasing the number of firms, because each firm is making a profit. You have free entry, so you keep increasing, and this will go on to infinity. but you cannot go on to infinity because now you will start interfering with the demand curve. So, so now you see, now we get into the complexity argument. Suppose so you have thousands of small firms. So for each little firm, a small expansion is fine. It will not affect the price. But so you have 1,000 identical small firms, and all of them have incentive to expand by a small amount. So, but if all of them expand by a small amount, then you will have a huge increase in the quantity being supplied, and you will have a reduction in supply. And so the supply and demand theory, which holds at the firm level, does not hold at the industry level. And so again, supply and demand theory is not valid. What the textbook says is that the same formula is true for the firm, and the supply curve for the industry is the same as the supply curve for the firm. But this is not true, because the industry level, the supply curve cannot be of the same type, because the industry faces a declining demand. The industry cannot face a flat demand. So again, supply and demand analysis breaks down. Is that argument? This is a complicated argument, but it should be clear enough. So that is Sraffa's argument. Right? Now,
Sir,
did I-
in
huh?
some textbook, supply curve of labor is mentioned in spiral way.
Yes, the backward bending. Yes. Again, this is a problem for classical supply and demand theory, because that means that at one wage you have two possible supplies. So the supply curve of labor is not fixed. That at a given wage you have a determinate level of supply. You have two possible levels of supply at one given wage level. That is an objection, and then there is to supply and demand, and there is a counter objection to this objection by supply and demand theorists. They say that one of these equilibrium will be stable and the other one will not be stable. So we don't need to worry about the second part of the supply curve. But then there is more arguments that can be made. So these are very difficult arguments, but I am trying to explain to you the simple arguments that you can use to convince other people. So this is not there is a third argument, which is also one that I have made, not in these lectures, but in the one that I made before I went, which is the exogeneity endogeneity argument. So does anybody understand this argument?
Yes, sir. So actually, supply and demand model determine price.
Can somebody else provide this explanation?
सर सप्लाई और डिमांड जो है वो प्राइस को डिटरमिन करता है, तो प्राइस कैसे इनको डिटरमिन कर सकती है?
Actually, price is outcome in supply and demand model.
Right.
According to like a convention economics.
Right.
But they also consider that if price increase, what will happen to supply? Then how the same variable can be exogenous and endogenous at the same time? So
Right.
this differentiation between endogenous variable and exogenous variable is missing in conventional economics.
Right. That is correct, but is it sufficiently clear? I think that it's clear to me, but I'm not sure if it... So, all right, so can somebody explain this argument in a way that the average PhD in economics will be able to understand it?
So up to date we have studied that variables which are outside the model are considered as exogenous, and the variables which are discussed within the model are known as endogenous variables. But when we study supply and demand model, we say that supply and demand are endogenous and price is exogenous, that is outcome.
No, price is endogenous.
Price is endogenous.
And in return, price is affecting supply and demand. How can this be possible?
Actually, sir, price is the outcome of the model.
Right.
But then again, it disturbs the exogenous variable. We first say that it's the outcome. Price is decided within the model. Then we say if price changes, then the exogenous variables like supply and demand will change. This doesn't make sense. From the one side, we say that it's decided by the model, and then
See, the question
Sir,
more, yes.
सर हम ये कहते हैं कि जो सप्लाई एंड डिमांड है वो सप्लाई एंड डिमांड डिटरमाइन करती है प्राइसेस को, लेकिन सर हम ऑन दी अदर साइड यही कहते हैं कि जो सप्लाई कर्व है वो जो फर्म्स होती है वो ये डिसाइड करी कि इस प्राइस के ऊपर मैं इतना सप्लाई करूँगी. तो सर यहाँ ये प्रॉब्लम एग्जिस्ट करती है, क्योंकि अगर सप्लाई एंड डिमांड ही प्राइसेस को डिटरमाइन कर रही है तो फिर जो फर्म है वो किन प्राइसेस के बिहाफ के ऊपर सप्लाई कर रही है.
Right, this is the correct angle. The question is, how do we construct the supply curve? So, the economists tell you, the students you will ask about this, they will tell you that we determine the supply curve by asking the firm that if the price is $10 per unit, how much will you supply? And if the price is $11 per unit, how much will you supply? But now the question is, so the firm is price taker, that is how it has to be. That the price is set at the equilibrium level of supply and demand. The price is fixed and the price is determined by the supply curve. So now you are telling me that to construct the supply curve, I am going to change the price. So now how is the price curve going to change if the supply curve is fixed and the demand curve is fixed? But in order to construct the supply curve, in order to construct the demand curve, you have to change the prices. So, to make it more, this is a technical argument, to make it realistic and understandable, you have to say, okay, here's the experiment that the Varian writes about. He says that, okay, here's the rental market, the housing market, and we ask the student, well, in the rental market you can't actually construct the demand curve, because if you ask the student that how many units of housing will you hire if the price of housing is 600 rupees, and if it's 6,000 rupees per room, or if it's 7,000, or if it's 5,000, the student has only one unit of demand and he's going to hire that one unit regardless of what the price is, up to his budget constraint. So here again the demand curve doesn't work. But let's forget about that problem. We say that, okay, we'll go to bananas and we'll ask, okay, this is the price of bananas, how many bananas will you buy? So now the question is that everybody knows that the supply and demand, so the student you are asking about, if supply and demand is the true theory of the market, he says that, look, the supply curve of the demand bananas is this, and the demand curve is this, and we have calculated, and the equilibrium price of bananas is 100 rupees per dozen. So now you are telling me, how much should I demand if the price is 110? But now I am asking you, how did the price become 110? What happened? Did the supply change? Did the demand change? Is this a temporary disequilibrium? All of these things matter. So, so suppose I have to explain how did because this price is not exogenous, it cannot be moved around. The exogenous variables are determined outside the system, and so something outside the system happened and changed, and it changed the price. So if that's an exogenous variable, we don't need to know what happened, because that's a part of the system. How the price is determined, if you see the exogenous variable means that how it is determined, I'm not interested in explaining, and it doesn't matter for my purposes. There is a system I'm analyzing a small sub-part of the system. The big system I don't know and I don't understand. This is a method of analysis. I am trying to understand a small piece of the big complicated system. So how this price is determined, if it's exogenous, I don't know, and I'm not interested. It's not part of my system. But the price of bananas is exactly what I'm trying to explain. So if I say the price moves and I won't explain why it moved, then you are being inconsistent, incoherent. You're saying that my model explains the price of bananas. And now you are saying that the price of bananas is changing from 100 to 110 and I won't explain why this happened. You can't say both of these things. You can say only one or the other. You can take price as exogenous if you want for studying something else. So, okay, I'm going to study the price of apples and I'm going to take the price of bananas as exogenous. So, okay, price of bananas is determined in the banana market and I'm studying the apple market. So, I can take it as exogenous and it might have an effect because people might substitute apples for bananas. So, it matters for my purposes, but it is exogenous. I'm only looking at apples, so I look at how many apple trees there are, how the farmers decide to harvest apples, how they bring it to the market, how people decide how many apples to buy. These things are all things that I'm studying. This is the endogenous variables. But the price of bananas, I don't want to study all of the market of bananas. That's very complicated and different and difficult. So I say, okay, let's hold that as exogenous. Whatever it is, I will take it as a outside variable. But now, I say the price of apples, which is what I'm trying to explain, is also exogenous. Then I'm saying something which is inherently contradictory. And now it matters, you see, because I say that, okay, the price of bananas has increased to 110 because there was something happened in the supply curve. Lots of bananas, crops failed. So now, okay, so that is, for the demand curve, that is an exogenous event and it won't have. On the other hand, so I will have some response to that. On the other hand, if I say that the demand curve itself has shifted, everybody today is asking for more bananas. So the same level of bananas is not sufficient to supply the demand. Like maybe it's become Ramzan. So now everybody is asking for bananas, for fruit chaat, for iftari. So now my response to this will be different according to these three possible. There are three possible reasons in my own supply and demand model why the price can change. One is that the supply curve has shifted downwards, so the supply curve shifts outwards. There is less supply at each price. Price will go up. So I will have a different response to this. That is kind of exogenous to the demand. It's not exogenous to the model, but the model itself breaks down further the demand factors and the supply factors, and supposedly these two are isolated from each other. So we can analyze demand separately from the supply. This need not happen, and in fact that is also an element of the Sraffa argument, that the demand factors and the supply factors interact. But so if we think about the demand curve itself, then a shift in the supply can be exogenous. If it is exogenous, then I can answer this question that yes, the price shifted to 110 because of the change in supply. Then this is how I will behave. But there is another factor that, okay, everybody is demanding more. Now, I may have a different response. Am I one of those people who is also demanding more, or am I not? Now, this is a circular sort of a question. And the third reason why the price can increase is because of temporary disequilibrium. The price is 110. At 110, the demand will be less than the supply, and there will be surplus at the end of the day, which will send a signal to the suppliers that this is not the equilibrium, and they will cut back on their supply. So depending on these three, in each three of cases, I might have a different response as to how I will behave. In a temporary disequilibrium, I say, okay, I can do without bananas for one day, tomorrow prices will be all right, and I will buy tomorrow. So my demand temporarily is different, and for tomorrow it's different. In the case of a supply shift, if I think this is a long-term problem, then I will behave differently. I'll say, okay, this is permanent, I have to decide how much to buy. In case of a demand shift, I have to decide, okay, everybody is demanding more, should I go along with them or should I be different? So all of these three questions have different answers because price is not an exogenous, it's not free to move. Because it's not free to move, you cannot ask this question, and this question is used to create the demand curve. So that is why there is a circularity in the argument. It can be fixed, but it is not easy to fix. It can be fixed. You can recreate a demand supply taking into account exogenous and endogenous, but it is not at all easy. These are just some of the factors that have to be fixed, and then there is still more things which happen which create interactions between supply and demand. So I have given you three arguments against supply and demand, and so now your assignment is to see if you can try to convince somebody who believes in supply and demand that supply and demand theory is not true. And you can find people who believe in supply and demand everywhere.
Yeah.
So you will report on your arguments and counter arguments in writing in 1 week, next week, tomorrow, Tuesday. So see if you succeed or not. All right.